there?
There are people out there. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm looking in our chat here, Gary. It looks like we have Jard from Thailand here, Diana from Mexico City, Josefa. Hi, we were chatting this morning. Nice to see you. Jamie's here from Greenville, South Carolina. We have our colleague Mark. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We are going to be getting started in just a minute here. We are going to wait a minute, let people join, and get ready to go. We're so excited for our conversation this morning about social and emotional learning. Let's get this up for you. Practicing international mindedness, empathy, and respect through global exchanges. Whoa, too much of a preview there for you. If you haven't yet, please introduce yourself in our chat so that we know who you are and where you are from. You'll find some links as well under the video so you can follow along with this presentation and access some of the links to additional resources. Also, there are some other links there for you fun things for you to explore, which we will be talking about soon. Thank you. All right. It looks like we've had a few more people join. Let's go ahead and dive into our conversation here today. So we're going to be talking about practicing international mindedness, empathy, and respect through global exchanges. Now, this is just one part of social and emotional learning. There is a lot more within social and emotional learning, which we will sort of touch on in this webinar, but most of our conversation is going to stay focused on international mindedness, empathy, and respect. My name is Jessica. Nice to meet you guys. I'm the community manager here at Pen Pal Schools, and before this, I was a high school special education teacher in the Bronx. So I had a lot of experience. My school was a restorative justice school. We transitioned our entire discipline model to a restorative justice approach, and we really found that embedding empathy as one of our core values and more respect and international mindedness really helped empower our students to think more critically about the future and their roles and what they want to do with their lives. Today we were supposed to be joined by Jalpa Sheth. She's an amazing educator from the Oberoi International School in India, but she is having a family emergency this morning. So I'm so sorry you will not be able to hear from her. But if you join us for another webinar in the future, you may have a chance. She presents with us a lot. But we are lucky to have Gary Kohlenbrander. He is a teacher from our same town here in Texas in the United States, a really wonderful elementary school teacher. I'll let him introduce a little bit more about him and his experience.
Yes, good morning and good evening or good night, wherever you may be. My name is Gary Kohlenbrander. I teach 4th and 5th grade at NIOS Charter School in Austin, Texas. NIOS stands for NYOS, not your ordinary school. And so we have a charter school public model, and we do a lot of innovative things that I think make our school very special in a way that the name is not just in name only, but we really embody it with our programming, such as competency-based education. We don't have letter grades. We do competency-based grading. And a lot of our social emotional learning is really put on the front lines of what we do. So I hope I'm getting excited about talking about that with you today.
Great, thank you, Gary. So let's dive right on in here. Practicing empathy, social respect, and social international mindedness. I'm so sorry. That is one of our core values here at Pen Pal Schools. Just to briefly give you an idea of who we are and why we're hosting this webinar, we connect students around the world to learn together through global project-based learning. Now, project-based learning is something you are going to hear more about this morning, how it relates to social and emotional learning. We've connected 350,000 students from around the world to learn together. And so anytime a student gets a chance to interact authentically with their peers from around the world, they are getting a really unique way to practice social and emotional skills. They're not just learning about the world, they're really engaging and developing international mindedness. And on Pen Pal Schools, that happens through our topics. So this is just an example of some of our project-based learning units that connect students around the world. And I hope they give you an idea of how international perspectives could fit into some of your curriculum in your school. You'll see some of these topics seem very obvious for bringing in global perspectives like flags of the world or immigration. But other topics may not be what you think of when you think international mindedness. So financial literacy and money management. Yes, even discussing that topic with students, you can bring in international mindedness, empathy, and respect. Poetry, schools around the world. I really encourage you after this webinar, as you are going back to your curriculum, to take a look at some of the topics you're going to be discussing with students soon, and challenge yourself to think about how diverse perspectives could improve that curriculum for them. Where in your curriculum is there opportunities to maybe connect with someone from outside of your school? So we are going to be answering a few questions here, discussing social and emotional learning. Gary's going to offer some perspective, and then I have some feedback from some other teachers in the Pen Pal Schools community. But we're going to start with a really simple and complex one. What is social and emotional learning? I'm going to show you a few ways that we define this, and then I'm going to let Gary step in and answer how he defines this in his classroom. At Pen Pal Schools, we have narrowed down social and emotional learning to a group of core skills. So respect and empathy, you see international mindedness up there as well, but also self-awareness, so social engagement, self-motivation, which is often one that teachers really struggle to foster in their classrooms, collaboration, identifying problems and analyzing situations, that is a social and emotional learning skill, as well as ethical responsibility. We have built our understanding of social and emotional learning with some really helpful resources that I want to share with you today. One of them is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. You can find them at casel.org. The link is in the slide deck, so if you want to access that in the video description, you can easily find CASEL. And they've put together a framework for social and emotional learning that has really helped us and other teachers around the world learn about embedding these skills, not just in their classrooms, but you'll see in schools and in the home and communities. You'll hear this from some of our speakers today, that social and emotional learning doesn't just happen in one place. It is in your curriculum, it's in your school-wide practices and policies, and it's in how you interact and engage with families and your community partners. And then so within all of those ecosystems, CASEL defines social and emotional learning in 5 categories: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So international mindedness, empathy, and respect really help students foster that social awareness and develop those relationship skills. At Pen Pal Schools, we also work really closely with the International Baccalaureate program. And we have a lot of IB schools who use Pen Pal Schools to bring in diverse global perspectives, not just one classroom or one student from another country, but a lot of diverse perspectives through project-based learning. And so this is what an executive director from an IB school in Japan, how he has defined international mindedness. At the heart of international mindedness is a frame of mind, a curiosity about the world, an openness towards things other, and a profound appreciation of the complexity of our world and our relationships to each other. You don't have to be in an international context to develop this kind of mindset. So international mindedness isn't just about, oh, my students have connected and traveled and they're aware of the world, but it's about fostering this curiosity and this openness to things that are different from what you know and understand. And that can be really, really hard and challenging to manage in a classroom with a bunch of students. So before we go on to the next question, let's kick it back to Gary. How do you define social and emotional learning? What does it look like in your classroom in your school?
Yeah, so I think social emotional learning is a huge part of the evolution of education nowadays, and how we see students and how they fit into the world, and also how the teacher interrelates with them, and the classroom being a more collaborative space where we want learners to have agency and be able to create opportunities and take initiative in the world. And so, it's this whole evolution throughout the 20th and now the 21st century of connectedness, and needing to be aware of your own mind state and the mind states of those around you, and their individual differences, and monitoring those and being aware as you interact and as you learn. And that's really what the heart of social emotional learning is. At my school, I think it's important to recognize that before you jump into international mindedness, it's important to create a culture of awareness and respect. And so at my school, we use the tribes framework, which you can look it up online. The tribes framework is based on mutual respect, and having a close-knit class system and culture. So we have 4 agreements, the most important 2 of which I would say would be mutual respect and attentive listening. And every day we start the day and end the day with a community circle. So you might be familiar with that, you might not, but it's a really nice way to start the day. Sometimes we start with a question about what, something in the world. Sometimes we start with a sentence stem that might just give you a couple seconds to respond. It just depends on how much time we have, but it really helps to develop that class community. And that's really what we're all about, is those stories and getting to know each other, so that when the going gets tough, that's what I say to my kids a lot, when the going gets tough is when it's really on the line, and when you can show that social maturity and deal with emotions or situations that might not always be to your liking, and that you might have to negotiate that. So that's one aspect of building community from the beginning. We spend the first couple weeks of school just building that with our new classes. And then we have discovery activities where we actually go out and do kind of a collaborative task. And the kids we form teams and get together and do those. And then we debrief and talk about how it went, and, how you interacted with the people on your team or out of your team. I do a lot of SEL, or social emotional learning, SEL, just call it SEL themed songs and activities like that throughout, especially on Fridays. I'll often designate an hour to do that. And we have pre and post assessments as well for each quarter, where we talk about how you would gauge yourself on those different 5, actually we have 4, but the different aspects of social emotional growth. So everyday community circle, practicing group norms, mutual respect. For younger children, I've found that it really helps to have some, video introductions of the different concepts of social emotional learning, because they might not have encountered it at all before. And there are wonderful resources online for that. There's a great, for example, Sesame Street video with Mark Ruffalo introducing what empathy is, and how you can stand in other people's shoes and see things from their point of view and feel their emotions. And then older kids, you can delve into documentary film and things like that to introduce them to other perspectives. And there's a lot of stories and sharing and talking, and that's really what fosters social emotional growth in my classroom.
Thank you so much, Gary. You reminded me of 2 things.
Yeah.
One is, I've heard a lot of teachers actually say that they start the process of international mindedness within their classroom, focused only on their students.
Exactly.
Because even your students, even if they're all from the same town, they carry a lot of stories within them that could bring just a wider awareness of the world outside of your town or your community. So building that community with your students, getting them to know each other, and getting them to really tell some stories about themselves is a great way to start getting the wheels turning towards international mindedness.
And a lot of us have classes with English language learners or students from other cultures, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of growth and learning that can happen right there.
Yeah, I hear this a lot from teachers in the United States.
Mhm.
That they, there's communities that are really, really growing and changing, and even teachers in Eastern Europe where they are having a lot of migration, and their communities are changing very, very rapidly. They're really having these conversations in their classrooms because they
Yeah.
have to, and it all starts with building your classroom culture.
It is so true. And like our ELLs often feel shy to share their opinions because their English might not be, 100%, but it's like that's part of it, and to foster the openness and the respect of understanding that someone might be going through that. In the past, we were living in a sort of English monoculture in the United States. And nowadays it's just exploded, and we really need to have that openness and empathy to somebody who's going through that. If you've ever been to another culture yourself, it's like, how would you feel if you were in their shoes and you couldn't speak that language? And we need to, foster that understanding in our students.
Yes. And another thing I thought of as you were speaking is the idea that these skills are not taught in isolation.
Right.
These social emotional learning skills really show up together. So respect and empathy, international mindedness and self-awareness. It's very, I see someone asked in the chat already about assessment, and we're going to be taking some questions at the end. So we'll come back and answer that for you, Hemant. But one thing to keep in mind is that these are not skills that you can easily isolate and focus on. They really are embedded in the fabric of your classroom culture, your curriculum, your instruction, your school practices, and how your school engages with the community. So let's dive into our next question here. How do you promote empathy and respect in your classroom? I'm going to let Gary step on in, and I'm also going to share on the slide deck here, you can see links to some of the resources that Gary's going to share with you here.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, with younger kids, I'll often introduce each of our 4 domains are mutual respect, growth mindset, self-regulation, and responsibility. And so each of those 4 I introduce individually throughout the first 4 weeks of class, and then we cycle through them one more time. The kids do a pre-assessment of themselves, how they think they are, and I introduce them with little videos. They're not the ones that are on this slide because they're more just the rudimentary introductory ones. But that's a really nice way to start off if you have kids who aren't familiar with the technical terms of growth mindset or self-regulation. Those are a good place to start, and I can provide those later in the chat if you need those.
Okay.
And then once we get rolling and we're cycling through these again, and the kids have already been introduced to the broad concepts, I'll use little films like the ones on the slide here to present, sort of situations that are, sort of universal. And I think media is a good way to talk about stories without having to be too subjective. And you can empathize with characters. Everybody can empathize with characters and discuss the issues and emotions that come up in narrative in a way that I've found very very fruitful. So, for example, the Lost and Found one is a great friendship film where a friend has to give his life for another. It's playful and funny and very, very technically amazing, but just wonderful emotions. The Present is a great one where there's a kid with a 3-legged dog, and by the end, the viewer, it sort of turns the perspective around, and you realize that the boy also has a disability. And and then the I think the 4 links on the bottom of the page there are more for maybe upper elementary, middle, and high school. The Global Oneness Project is a wonderful kind of repository of documentary films that have been made across the globe to share, and they also have lessons that have been built around these films. So it's just an amazing resource. The Empathy Museum is a wonderful video where they turn the literal or the figurative expression, stand in someone's shoes, into a literal place where you can go and wear shoes and hear the voices of the people who wore them.
Wow.
A Mile in My Shoes is a newsletter set, a text set where they have different perspectives of people from around the world. And then Karma Tube is another great documentary film resource. I've also found that empathy and respect can be brought in a lot with read alouds. So I'm just off the top of my head, Towers Falling is a great one about 9/11 that has multicultural perspectives on that event. And Wonder, of course, is a great book that's pretty universal in themes. And those are books that I've read with my 4th and 5th graders and used as a springboard to a lot of social emotional discussions. So those are just some things I've done. And as I mentioned before, the discovery activities we do are actually hands-on activities where we get in teams and have to, do something to a task that you have to succeed at. And it's not competitive, but it's more to build that teamwork. So those are some things, and especially with the ones on the slide there, that's how I've used them.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's a lot of, Gary's shared a lot of films and media, but there's a lot of ways to bring these stories into your classroom. And I just want to reiterate that idea of thinking about these perspectives in terms of a story. Students really love stories, and it's a forum they're familiar with. It's a way of relaying information that they really absorb. So anytime you're trying to focus on empathy or respect, and you're bringing some of these resources into your classroom, I encourage you to really try to frame them as a story and help your students understand and process the story.
It's a way of depersonalizing it too. That's more, comfortable for a lot of students when they're, if you make everything personal or, just following the conflicts that might come up in the classroom, that often gets difficult. So it's good to analyze things on a depersonal level often first, and deal with those emotions one at a time that way.
I'm going to go quickly through these slides here, if that's okay with you, Gary, so we can get to some questions, because we are approaching the end of our time together here. Our next question is, how do you promote international mindedness in your classroom? And I think we've touched on this question already, but I do want to share some really great pictures from Gary's class. I've had the privilege of observing Gary's classroom, and the first thing I really noticed was how globally connected the classroom walls even looked. There is materials and posters and texts and signs that really, affirm everything that you've heard from Gary today and really support social emotional learning skills, international mindedness. Did your students make these globe lanterns?
Yeah, we made those on Earth Day.
On Earth Day.
Yeah.
Through projects. Here's an opportunity. I actually had to go into Gary's classroom when they were finishing a Pen Pal Schools project. And they were taking all of the learning, all the diverse perspectives they engaged with, and creating artwork for their classroom. And you can see the poster at the top of the wall, Let Learning Take You Around the World. So these are ways that, again, in your curriculum, but also in your instruction and in your classroom culture, how you decorate and design your classroom, you can really foster these social and emotional learning skills. Gary does a really great Fall Festivals Around the World project-based unit. I'm gonna let him introduce it briefly here, but there is a link in the bio so you can go access this unit and some of these materials. Yeah,
and that's a postcard wall there we created with a world map and pictures and stories from around the world. It's kind of based on the Atlas Obscura one, but we sort of did it for our own classroom. And then you're welcome to go. I've started a flash sale on my project-based unit there, and it's just $2. If you do use it, please give me a little review, give me a shout out. But Yeah, I've just have had my students study about other cultures and countries through a lens of understanding with topics like geography, education, religion, food, music, often similar to what Pen Pal Schools has with their World Explorer project. It's a great way to expose them to different celebrations and cultural practices. And these days, there are great tools from Google, such as Earth and Tour Builder. You can do Mystery Skype, which is a wonderful a game that Skype has set up. You go to the Skype for the classroom site, and you'll find out more about that. Google Earth and Atlas Obscura also are wonderful resources that have global, sharing and possibilities in them. So those are just a few.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah.
Our next question here, which I'm going to go very quickly through, how do global exchanges support social and emotional learning? For the sake of time, I'm not going to play this video, but this is a director of innovative learning at a private school in Texas. Her school is using Pen Pal Schools to connect students around the world, and it's very much connected to their social and emotional learning focus. This idea of connecting students outside of their country and their school communities and their states and all of these things, it's just a way to bring in another layer of authenticity to your international connections, to your social and emotional learning. It's really exposing your students to people who are very, very different from them, and people they don't know. So I encourage you to go and hear what Allison has to say, especially if you're an administrator and you're thinking about school-wide social and emotional learning. She has a very great perspective on that. I want to get into our questions from the audience here. Gary shared a lot of tools and resources for connecting students with their peers around the world. And Pen Pal Schools is a really quick and easy resource in case you are looking to bring more global connections into your school, but you don't know how. Let's get into some questions. I know we have some in our chat already. If you still have a question, please drop it in and we'll try to get to it in the next 3 minutes here. I know Hemant from India said, could you please explain more on how you assess the development post-collaborative assignments?
Sure.
Go
ahead.
Just very briefly, on Pen Pal Schools, we have an assessment tool built in, and we've designated assessment criteria for these social and emotional learning skills, which we've aligned to standards. So IB standards as well as CASEL standards, which is why I showed you those. Gary, how do you assess?
So as I said, we do a pre-assessment at the beginning of the year. The students have an opportunity to go through each of the domains separately, think about how they deal with it in their everyday lives, and I usually push them to think about what about when things get tough, because that's always an issue with some students who are like, oh yeah, I got a great growth mindset, until they have to do that really hard math problem, and then you really see it come out. So I push them to understand that it's not just about thinking in abstraction, but what about when things are difficult? So we have them do a pre-assessment, and then after each quarter, we actually have embedded the social emotional domains on our student grade reports. And so then we talk about it together as a student, teacher, and parent group, and we talk about how they've done and whether they've developed, and issues that we might want to set as goals for the next cycle. And so that's sort of for individual assignments. I often just embed that in my rubrics for my assignments, and as being sort of a how did you do with your group sort of, not necessarily a score, but a comment, or if there were issues to bring them up, that kind of thing.
Yeah, something I'm really hearing here that I want to reiterate is really making these skills transparent for your students. So I'm going to come back on screen here now that we're at the end. Making these skills transparent for your students so they're not just wondering and guessing at what you're looking for in their collaboration or in their projects. But they should know what empathy is. They should know what respect is. And what I've heard really from Gary that I want to reiterate is your students should also be helping create that definition for your classroom and for themselves. So it's not just about teaching your students what empathy is, but helping your students develop their own understanding of empathy and helping your classroom develop its own culture of empathy, and then helping your school develop its own culture of empathy and really growing it out from there. Which is why I think it's great that we have teachers and administrators joining us today, because it really is a full team effort to move your school community to emphasize social and emotional learning.
And it's something that you really have to dedicate time to, and it takes, it's academics can feel very overwhelming, but it's really worth it to dedicate a time, especially at the beginning of the year and routinely throughout the week or the month, to having those discussions, because it really pays dividends in the long run. So
definitely.
Yeah.
We are running a few minutes over here, but I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you still have questions about social and emotional learning, drop them in the chat and we'll try to go into the chat there and answer them for you. I did want to just briefly end with a couple of slides, if I can find my slides. You can access the slide deck in the video description, so you can watch Allison's video, you can access all the resources that Gary shared. I just wanted to, again, invite everybody to join our global learning community on Pen Pal Schools. We have a lot of great projects available that can help you bring these international perspectives into your classroom very, very easily. The link to join our community is in the slide deck, so I encourage you to find it. If you are an administrator and you're curious about bringing a resource like Pen Pal Schools into your school, we are offering you a discount for attending this webinar. So at this link, you can fill out a form to claim your discount, and a member of our team will be in touch with you so we can discuss a school-wide initiative for fostering international mindedness, empathy, and respect through global collaboration. Thank you, Gary, so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. 30 minutes is not enough for all the wonderful things that you do in your classroom.
I agree. That was short. That was short. Thank you. I'm glad to do it.
Tips and resources. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to be hosting more webinars all throughout the fall, so keep an eye on our webinars page, and you'll hear from us. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.